Winning Blueprint presents.
In the Lab Room. Jacksonville Jaguars.
Welcome. You are in the lab room. It's Tuesday. Thank you for joining me. I'm your host, Lou, and this is the Jacksonville Jaguars lab follow-up. And there's a lot to get to with this team because it's funny that today is Tuesday and we're doing the Jacksonville Jaguars because they selected their GM today. They hired David Caldwell from the Atlanta Falcons. He was the director of football operations in Atlanta. Now he's going to be the GM for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so that move has been made. They held on and retained the services of Mike Mularkey. I was never in love with that hire. I think that was one of those ho-hum hirings. When he was hired, that was one of those ones that scrolled across the bottom of the screen and you said, that looks like a Jacksonville Jaguars move. There was no splash involved. There was no hoopla. It was just real quiet, real subtle. No one cares. Just like Jacksonville Jaguars football on Sundays. They're on, but is anybody watching? That was the same thing with that move. They hired him, but did anyone care? It was just one of those, Oh, okay. So, I don't know how much longer Mike Mularkey has. Another one of these seasons, and I'll guarantee you he will be fired. I don't even know if he makes it out of the season if they start off 1-8, 1-7, 0-6. He might be fired right there on the spot because he's been a very marginal coach at best throughout his whole career. And this dates back to Buffalo. That's why I didn't understand why he got this job because I was never enamored with him as a head coach. But look, just because you're not good the first time around doesn't mean the second time won't be the charm. And in some instances for coaches, they get 3 shots and the third time's the charm. So you can never tell with these head coaches. Sometimes it's where you are when you get the job. Are you really prepared for the job the first time around? Maybe you weren't. Second time you say, if I get a job, I'll learn from my mistakes and I'll be better at it. I just think Mike Mularkey isn't a good head coach. Just simple as that. How much of this is his fault though? There's a reason why the Jacksonville Jaguars have a new GM. Gene Smith was fired. And I'll tell you what, honestly, if you want my opinion, I think he was fired because he traded away picks to select Blaine Gabbert. And right now, Blaine Gabbert looks like a marginal NFL quarterback. And that's being generous. He's done nothing to warrant you to think that he can play at an elite level in the National Football League. And when you spend a high draft pick, including trading away picks to get someone, you expect them to be able to perform at a very high level. Well, that hasn't been Blaine Gabbert to this point, and I really don't think that that will be Blaine Gabbert. I think in due time, Blaine Gabbert will settle in his role in the National Football League as a backup quarterback. And you never want to see that happen for a guy that's drafted as high as he is, but I think he's heading down that David Carr path, that path to mediocrity. And he's buckled in the seatbelt. He's in the front seat. All he has to do is grab that steering wheel, start driving that car. But I think he's heading down that path. And I think that alone got Gene Smith fired. But really, Gene Smith could have been fired just because of the lack of talent on this team. This team stinks. And when your team as a whole, as a collection, as a group stinks, and there's not a lot of talent, and you don't get it done on the field, then the finger needs to be pointed at the GM, and that's what happened in this situation. Gene Smith had to go because there's not a lot of talent on this team. Seriously, there's not a lot of talent here. And this is the second year in a row that I've said, hey, man, the Jacksonville Jaguars don't have a lot of talent. I remember watching a Thursday night game a season ago. They were playing against the Falcons. It was pathetic. And they had guys lined up wide, Chastain, West, and you're looking at the sheet, at the roster, and you're like, Who is this guy? Who is that guy? Who is that guy? Who is that? Where are all the guys out of college that we've come to know? Fine, you don't want to get guys like that. Where are the guys that can actually play football? You don't have to be from LSU, Auburn, Alabama, Notre Dame, Florida, USC to play football. But where's the guys that can play football? Where are the guys that can get it done? There's not enough of them on this Jacksonville Jaguars roster. And so Gene Smith had to take the full brunt of the struggles of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and for good reason. This roster is littered with below average football players. And you can't win in this league. Below average football players get you a 2-14 mark. Now I will tell you this. A lot of the funk that you smell coming from the Jacksonville Jaguars is coming from the offense. The defense, I really thought they did a bang-up job this season of really keeping this team in football games. The Jacksonville Jaguars weren't blown out that many times. And even when they were blown out, it came at the end of the game after the defense has held on for as long as they possibly could, and they finally just broke. So I won't put all the blame on the defense. I put more of the blame on the offense. And again, in this league, you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance. Chad Henne was average. 11 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. That's average. Blaine Gabbert, before he got injured, average. 9 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, average. You can't win with average quarterbacks in the National Football League unless the rest of the team around that quarterback is superb. Then average quarterbacks can just be average and get it done. We've seen that happen before, but this isn't that case. The rest of this team isn't superb. They're just average. In some instances, below average. And you add an average quarterback or two to that mix, you get 2-14 as your result. So the name of the game for the new GM, David Caldwell, is simple. Get talent. That's your job coming in. The Jacksonville Jaguars aren't one of these teams that are strapped for cash. They're not one of these teams that are barely below the salary cap and they're pinching pennies and they got to figure out what they're going to do with this contract and that contract. They have money. Go out and spend it and go get some talent. Please. Because as you can see, the last GM didn't fare well by being frugal. Go spend the money. Go get talent. Go be a competitive football team in the AFC South Division. Because for the last 2 seasons, you've been anything but. And that's the first order of business for this Jacksonville Jaguars team moving forward. Now, defensively, I've already told you that I like this team. I don't think that the problem is the defense. I mean, you look at, I like Derek Cox. I think a lot of people don't know about a lot of the players on the Jacksonville Jaguars roster because they're not a good team. So it's easy for you to get bypassed, but I like what Derek Cox is doing out at corner. Tyson Alualu, an actual good pick. When they picked him, when they drafted him with a top 10, top 15 pick out of Cal, I was like, what the hell are the Jacksonville Jaguars doing? They need help. They don't need a defensive lineman, but he's actually good. And I actually like what he's doing. He led the team in sacks this season with 3.5 from the defensive tackle position. The fact that he leads the team with 3.5 sacks lets you know they don't have anyone getting it done on the outsides, though. So I like Tyson Alualu. I love Paul Posluszny. I think that he's getting it done at the linebacker position. I think he's a football player. And Posluszny, he's a guy that you can build around on that defense. And so I think they just need to continue to stack bricks on that defense. They have the foundation set. You got a guy at the defensive line that can be a dominant force in Alualu. You got Posluszny at the second wave at the linebacker position. And then you got Cox. And I even like DeJuan Landry and what those guys have been doing out in the secondary. So they have pieces in the secondary for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They just got to start getting some production out of this offense. And the one shining, budding star that they have potentially on this Jacksonville Jaguars offense. And if Gene Smith had anything to do with it, which he probably did, then I will give Gene Smith kudos for this. Cecil Shorts III was a revelation for this Jacksonville Jaguars team in the 2012 season. I mean, he burst onto the scene. He was making big plays. He won them a couple of games. I absolutely am feeling Cecil Shorts III. I had bypassed him the first couple of weeks, but when you continue to make 50, 60, 70-yard receptions and you keep helping your team even though they're not winning, you keep compiling 100-yard efforts, I can't ignore you. I have to notice what you're doing. And that's what Cecil Shorts III did in this season. I had to recognize the talent there. Because I kept trying to shut the door, and he kept knocking on the door. Hey, I had another 100-yard game. Hey, I had another 80-yard reception. Hey, I had another 50-yard reception. He kept doing that, and I had to keep taking notice till I finally said, hey, this guy can play football. Which is actually good, but bittersweet at the same time, because you drafted Justin Blackmon with your first overall selection in the draft last season, and he's not your best receiver. That's a problem. Again, that's a Gene Smith problem. Now, is Justin Blackmon garbage? I'm not saying that. But receiver is one of the hardest positions as a rookie to just come in and have an impact at. But I'm not making any excuses. At times, Justin Blackmon looked lethargic. He looked lost. He didn't look like a guy that wanted a top 10 selection. And so he needs to step up. Cecil Shorts can be your best receiver. Justin Blackmon shouldn't be that far behind, though. Mercedes Lewis needs to be included more in the offense. He's a big 6'6", 6'7" target. In the red zone, he should be lethal. Why he isn't catching 8 to 12 touchdowns every season behooves me. I have no idea why this guy isn't a monster in the red zone. I don't know. But the Jaguars struggled running the football this season. A large part of why they couldn't run the ball. No Maurice Jones-Drew. And to think they tried to lowball him out of money and didn't want to pay him and almost made the man sit out at the beginning of the season. And you see the end result. Sometimes you need to be careful of what you wish for because you just might get it. And you were willing to play without MJD? Well, guess what you got? No MJD basically in this season. He played in 6 games. He started 5 of them. He didn't play for the rest of the season after leaving in week 6. And he still was their leading rusher. I mean, how bad is that? The Jaguars averaged less than 4 yards a carry this season. Maurice Jones-Drew had over 400 yards rushing, and he led the team in rushing. That's anemic. And you already don't have consistent play at the quarterback position. To not have anything from the running back position either spells trouble with a capital T, and that lands you a 2-14 mark. Now, in the lab report for this team before the season started, I said they were a 3-13 team. I was wrong. They were 2-14 team. So I was off by one. I gave them more wins than they actually deserved. And so this offseason is huge for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Will they stay in Jacksonville? We don't know. What their ownership is going to do, we have no clue. But they need to start rebuilding this team from the ground up. You can't get much worse than the Jacksonville Jaguars have been over the last 2 seasons. Now it's time to start building upon the things that you already have gathered. All of these players that have some kind of talent, there's not many, but the Derek Coxes, the Tyson Alualus, the Paul Plus Nuzneys, the Cecil Shorts IIIs, the Maurice Jones-Drews, you need to start building around these type of players. Mercedes Lewis, these are the guys that are going to take you where you want to go. Terrence Knighting, I like some of the pieces they have, but they need to continue to build. Even Chris Przinski wasn't that bad this season out at safety. But you have to be more talented than the Jacksonville Jaguars are. And we'll see if they can start to build pieces here in the near future. So this next season for the Jacksonville Jaguars is going to be a big one because a lot of questions need to be answered. Maurice Jones-Drew, is he happy? Is he going to be a guy that you can rely on moving forward? Did you waste a pick on Blackmon? Is he going to evolve into the receiver that you drafted with your first overall pick, the 7th pick in the 2012 draft? Blaine Gabbert, I'm pretty convinced that he's not who you thought he was and he's not going to be able to get it done for you. Are you going to realize that now and move on? Or are you going to keep pressing the issue, keep trying to fit a round peg into a square hole and get fired because of it? Because that's what's going to happen to Mike Mularkey if Blaine Gabbert doesn't pan out and you continue to try to force feed the Jacksonville Jaguar fan base with that garbage. Because honestly, it doesn't take long to figure out. And look, I'm hard on him. I'm hard on every quarterback that's drafted high in the draft. Especially when you trade up, you make moves to go and acquire that quarterback. No one was beating down the door to select Blaine Gabbert. No one was beating down the door to select Christian Ponder. No one was beating down the door to select Jake Locker in that draft. There was a reason why those quarterbacks were able to fall back and be selected and trade up and have teams come up and get these guys. Because no one was really salivating over these quarterbacks. Now, again, my whole theory on that draft process, if you like a guy, you got a grade on him. Who cares what everyone else says he is? Who cares that they say he's a 3rd round grade, he's a 4th round grade? You have a 1st round grade on him, go get him. You can't wait to see if everyone else is going to allow that guy to fall to you. Go get him. And so that's what these teams did. Jacksonville was one of those teams that went and got the quarterback that they thought was the quarterback of the future. But they might have whiffed on this one. It's strike 2 right now. And they got one more strike on Blaine Gabbert, and I honestly don't need to see anymore. But if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars, it might be in your best interest to invest one more year in Blaine Gabbert, see what you get from that, see if he can grow, and move on if you can't get anything out of him. That might be the ultimate solution. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe he pans out in his 3rd season. Maybe he starts getting it. Everyone matures at a different rate in the National Football League. And so sometimes I lose sight of that. Maybe I'm wrong about Blaine Gabbert. At times, he's looked like a solid NFL quarterback. But most times, he's looked like a deer caught in headlights. And so I'm not sure if he's the answer or not, but maybe he needs one more shot. But if he doesn't work, he'll be gone, and so will Mike Mularkey as the head coach. Nonetheless, this offseason is huge because I think Jacksonville needs to start building pieces and needs to start changing the culture in that locker room. They're starting to become losers around there. They need to learn how to start winning football games. It needs to start next year. If you win 6 games next year, that's a huge step in the right direction. You win 7 games, even if you win 5, that's much better than 3-13. That's much better than 2-14. And so you got to start having guys in that locker room believe that they can win. And right now, they're starting to feel like every game is the same. We're going to lose. Offensively, that's where you need to focus in the offseason. Find out if Blaine Gabbert is the guy. If not, there are going to be quarterbacks out there. Find you one, plug him in, keep it moving. Running back. Maurice Jones-Drew will probably be back. You need to find some stuff to put behind him. Because right now, Rashad Jennings and Montel Owens and all those guys, they're okay. But you see what happens when Maurice Jones-Drew goes down. There's not another back there that can pick up the load, so to speak, when Maurice Jones-Drew is not in the game. So you need to draft something. Even if you spend a 5th or 6th round draft pick, you need to find someone that can carry the rock for you. Spell Maurice Jones-Drew, and if he were to go down in that event, that next guy can step in and be a Band-Aid and be a bridge until Maurice Jones-Drew comes back. It all starts at the quarterback position now. You keep getting marginal performances out of your quarterback, this will be a marginal to below average team in the National Football League. Simple as that. And so that's going to do it for the Jacksonville Jaguars and their lab follow-up. Thank you for joining me. Stay tuned for the rest of this series as we continue to go through all of the NFL's 32 teams and have a lab follow-up for each of those teams. Tomorrow we will be chronicling the Oakland Raiders, their struggles through the 2012 season, what they need to do moving forward to make this franchise a better one and continue to climb back to prominence, because the Raiders for such a long time were a dominant team back in the 70s. Now they're just an afterthought. And so what do the Raiders need to continue to do to build this franchise back into a respected franchise? Because right now they're an absolute joke. So we'll talk about the Raiders tomorrow. See you then. Thank you for joining me here in the lab room on this lab follow-up. I will see you tomorrow.
Jacksonville Jaguars.